She rejected the most powerful alpha alive, and nobody ever recovered from it. Not him, not the kingdom, not the moon goddess herself, who, according to the oldest wolf lore ever scratched into Moonstone, has never allowed a fated bond to be severed and survived. But Elena did it anyway. I was there. I watched her walk barefoot out of Shadowmere Palace into the snow. Chest split open, bond bleeding. A wound you can't see but every wolf in that great hall felt. Like a crack running through the earth. The blood moon was still high, still watching, and Alpha King Caspian Drave stood in the silence she left behind, crown on his head, court around him, power beneath his feet, utterly, completely unmade. This is not a story about a king. It's not really about a queen either. Like it's about what happens in the space between rejection and return. The 10 years nobody talks about, the war, the secrets, the ancient lore the pureblood elders spent 3 centuries trying to bury. It's about a woman who saw the future and was terrified it included him. My name doesn't matter. Theirs does. So let's go back. All the way back. To the night everything broke. The great hall smelled like pine, iron, and something older than all of us. Old power, the kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just sits there, heavy in the air, pressing against your chest like a hand that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to hold you or crush you. I remember the candles, thousands of them, lined across every stone ledge, every arch, and every corner of Shadowmere's great hall, burning blood red because of the moon above. Because when the blood moon rises, even fire obeys. Elena was standing near the back, barefoot, always barefoot. She said shoes made her feel like the earth couldn't reach her. I never understood that until much later, until I understood what she was. She didn't want to be there. You could see it in her shoulders, that particular tension of someone who has already calculated every exit in a room and found them all insufficient. Reina had brought her. Reina. Even saying the name does something to the air. She stood 3 steps ahead of Elena, dressed like ambition itself. Silver threaded gown, spine straight, eyes already moving across the room like a general reading a battlefield before the first sword is drawn. She wasn't there to find a mate. Reina Blackwood had never done anything in her life for a reason as simple as that. She was there because she had a plan. She was always there because she had a plan. But here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. Elena knew something was wrong. Not vaguely, not instinctively. She knew the way only a lunaseer knows things. In images, in fragments, in flashes that arrive like lightning and leave you standing in the dark, wondering if what you saw was real or mercy. She had been seeing fragments for 3 weeks. Blood, a throne, fire moving across a map like water. And a face. Always the same face. Always at the center of everything burning. That she had never seen before, but already recognized the way you recognize a storm before it arrives. She should have run that night. Why didn't she run? I've asked myself that question for 50 years. Maybe she thought she could control it. Maybe she thought proximity to the vision would sharpen it. Give her enough detail to finally understand what she was supposed to do. Maybe she was just 23 years old and exhausted from running from things she couldn't name. Or maybe, and this is the part nobody wants to say out loud, maybe the bond was already working, before the eye contact, before the snap, before any of it. Maybe the moon goddess had been pulling those 2 souls toward each other since birth, and Elena simply ran out of continent. Then the doors opened, and every unmated wolf in that hall went completely, collectively still. Still. The kind of still that happens when every animal instinct in every body in a room fires at once and arrives at the same conclusion. Apex. Here, now. Alpha King. Caspian Drave walked in like he wasn't walking into a room full of wolves who would have died for a single word of acknowledgement from him. He walked in like a man who had long since stopped being impressed by his own power and had begun, quietly, to be tired of it. He was younger than the portrait suggested, and older than his years in ways that had nothing to do with age. His beta, Orion, flanked his left. 2 royal guards flanked his right. His crown caught the blood-red candlelight and held it, not gleaming, not performing, just there, like everything else about him, present in a way that made the room feel smaller. He wasn't scanning for a mate, or his eyes were moving the same way Reina's were, ridding, calculating, already 3 conversations ahead of the room. And then, his gaze crossed the great hall, moved past the pure-blood daughters positioned deliberately in his eyeline, past the council members, past Reina, and landed on Elena, who was barefoot near the back, already turning away. The bond didn't ease in. It detonated. I felt it from where I stood. Every wolf in that hall felt it. A seismic shift in the air. A low resonant sound that wasn't quite sound, more like pressure, like the moment before thunder when you feel it in your back teeth. Elena's hand flew to her chest. Caspian went completely still. And the entire great hall of Shadowmere Palace stayed still. Because the moon goddess had just spoken. And the question was whether anyone was brave enough to listen. Elena was already deciding not to. What do you do when the future you've seen tells you that the most sacred thing the universe is offering you is the very thing that will destroy everything you love? Do you trust the goddess? Or do you trust what you saw? The first vision came on a Tuesday. I remember because Elena told me later that ordinary days were always when the extraordinary arrived. Never during a storm, never at midnight. Always on a Tuesday. Always while she was doing something painfully mundane, like washing her hands, or braiding her hair, or watching water come to boil. This one came while she was braiding her hair. She told me the images didn't arrive like dreams. Dreams have a softness to them, a negotiable quality. You can half dismiss a dream by afternoon. Lunaseer visions don't negotiate. They arrive like a fist through glass, sharp, immediate. And once you've seen what they show you, you cannot unknow it. You cannot fold it away neatly and return to the life you had 3 seconds before. You just carry it. Forever, she saw the throne first. Shadowmere's throne. She recognized it from the histories, from the sketches in the old texts Bella Morn had quietly passed to her over the years. But in the vision it wasn't gold and moonstone. It was dark, soaked. The blood wasn't fresh. It had dried into the cracks, into the carved wolf heads at the armrests, into the base of it. Old violence. Settled violence. The kind that stops getting you shocked and just becomes furniture. Then the war. And she saw it moving across the continent, like the weather. Pack after pack. Ashbourne, Tidewolf, the Greymoor settlements, the borderland den she had grown up in. Consumed. Not quickly, slowly. The way of fire takes a forest when the wind is patient. And then herself, standing at the center of all of it. Not fighting, not running, just standing. Like the eye of it, like the reason for it. She told me that was the part that broke something in her, not the blood, not the war. The image of herself, calm, present, causal, at the heart of everything burning. What do you do with a vision like that? What do you do when the moon goddess shows you that you are the catalyst? She went to Bella Morn. Of course she did. Bella was ancient, 150 years held together by moon magic and sheer determination. She kept her age behind her eyes, not on her face. And she had known about Elena's Lunaseer gift since Elena was 9 years old and described, word for word, a vision of Bella's own past that nobody living could have known. Bella listened to everything, didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. Then she said,
Elena, sit down and hear me carefully because I am old and I will not repeat myself. Every Lunaseer who came before you made the same mistake. They saw the fire and concluded they were the one holding the torch. They weren't. They were the ones standing close enough to stop it. The moon shard doctrine doesn't prophesy your destruction, child. It prophesies your arrival. There's a difference so enormous that women have died on the wrong side of it. What you saw in that vision, your stillness at the center, that is not guilt. That is purpose. The moon goddess does not show her oracles what they caused. She shows them where they are needed. The question you should be asking is not why you are standing there. The question is why you are standing there alone.
Elena didn't sleep that night, or the night after, because Bella's words should have comforted her. They were designed to. They were wise and measured and centuries deep. But Elena kept returning to one fragment of the vision that she hadn't told Bella. One detail she had held back. In the vision, at the center of the war, in the eye of everything burning, Elena was standing alone, but there was a crown at her feet, not on her head, not in her hands. At her feet, like it had been placed there, or dropped there, or left there by someone who was no longer standing beside her. She knew whose crown it was. She had seen his face 3 weeks before she ever walked into that great hall. And that was the real reason she tried to reject him. Not to save the kingdom, not to prevent the war, and to prevent the moment she had already seen, where she survived everything. And he didn't. Everyone was waiting for him to break. That's the thing nobody talks about when they tell this story. The whole kingdom. Every pack leader, every pureblood elder, every court wolf from Shadowmere to the Tidewolf Coast. They were all waiting in anticipation, watching the alphaking, the way you watch a dam after heavy rain, waiting for the crack. It never came. And that somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. Because rage is readable. Rage has a shape. You can map it, predict it, position yourself around it. But silence, strategic, deliberate, patient silence from the most powerful alpha alive, that has no shape. That could mean anything. The morning after the blood moon ceremony, at Caspian Drave, dissolved the Pureblood Elder Council's military advisory seat. Quietly, with paperwork, no announcement, no speech. Just a document signed and sealed before dawn, slid under Lord Aldrich Vane's chamber door like it was a laundry bill. Aldrich Vane read it 3 times before he understood what it meant. Then he read it a 4th time because he couldn't believe it. 3 weeks later, Caspian opened the eastern grain routes, trade corridors that the pureblood elders had controlled, taxed, and weaponized for over a century. To every borderland pack and exile settlement on the continent, free passage, no levy, no loyalty oath required. The borderland wolves didn't trust it. They took it anyway, because winter was coming and pride doesn't feed children. By the 2nd year, our Caspian had replaced 4 of his 7 military generals with common-born wolves. Soldiers who had earned rank in the field rather than inherited it in a drawing room. The pureblood families called it an insult. The common packs called it the first honest thing a Drave king had done in 3 generations. His beta Orion told me once, years later over bad wine in a worse tavern, that he had asked Caspian directly what he was doing, not diplomatically, directly, the way only a beta who has known his alpha since childhood can ask. Caspian had looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm finding out who I am when no one is watching." Orion said he didn't understand it then. Neither did I, honestly, not until much later, because from the outside, it looked like governance. Smart, progressive, historically significant governance that scholars would spend centuries analyzing. It looked like a king finally stepping out from his father's shadow and building something worth inheriting. And it was all of those things. But it was also something else entirely, something nobody saw, something I only understood the night I found his private journal. Not by design, not by intrusion, but because Orion handed it to me after Caspian's death with shaking hands and said he would have wanted someone to know. And I sat with it for 3 hours in a cold room reading the same entry over and over. It was dated 4 days after the blood moon, 4 days after Elena walked out. And it said this:
She saw something in me that I haven't looked at yet. She is the only person in my existence who has ever had the power to destroy me, and chose not to use it. She chose to walk away instead. I don't know if that is mercy or verdict. I intend to find out, not for her, for myself. Because if she was right about what she saw, then I have no business being anyone's king, let alone anyone's mate. And if she was wrong, then I have 10 years of work ahead of me to prove it. Either way, I begin tomorrow.
4 days. He had decided in 4 days not to chase her, not to rage, not to force or hunt or demand, to look at himself. Do you understand how rare that is? In a man, in a king, in an alpha wolf whose entire biology is wired for pursuit, dominance, and reclamation, he chose accountability over instinct. Every single day. For 10 years. And here's the twist. The part that rewrote everything I thought I knew about this story. In the 7th year, the year the war began pulling at the continent's edges, Caspian's personal physician filed a private medical report. It never reached the council. It never reached the court. It was buried in Shadowmere's archive beneath 3 other documents, and I only found it because Bella Morn had marked its location in the margins of a text she left for Elena. The report stated that Alpha King Caspian Drave's bond wound, the biological damage from Elena's rejection, had not stabilized. It was accelerating. His wolf was not surviving the severed bond the way the royal physicians had initially believed. The deterioration had been slow enough in the first 3 years to appear manageable. By year 7, it was not manageable. His wolf was consuming itself from the inside. Organ function was declining in ways that had no other medical explanation. The physicians gave him, at most, 3 more years. He was dying, had been dying since the night she walked out. And here's what broke me completely when I read that report. Caspian knew. He had known since year 4, and he told no one, no court, no council, no beta. Not even Orion, who was his closest living friend and would have moved mountains to fix it. He kept governing, kept building, kept quietly, methodically dismantling every corrupt structure his father had built, and replacing it with something worthy, kept becoming the king Elena had not seen evidence of yet. Dying, alone, in complete silence, not to win her back. Because she had asked a question with her rejection. And he was determined to answer it honestly, even if she never came back to hear the answer. Even if it killed him. Even though it was killing him. The kingdom thought it was watching a powerful man prove his worth. It was actually watching a man choose integrity over survival. Every single day, for 10 years, and nobody knew what he. Let me tell you something about Raina Blackwood that the histories always get wrong. They call her a manipulator. They say it like it's simple, like manipulation is just a character flaw you circle in red and move on from. Like it exists in a vacuum, disconnected from everything that created it. They never ask what made her. I'm going to tell you what made her. At 14 years old, Raina watched her mother kneel before a pureblood elder council tribunal and confess, under duress, under threat, under the particular cruelty of wolves, who understand that the most effective way to break a she-wolf is through her children, to crimes she did not commit. Crimes that had been constructed, documented and delivered to the tribunal by Lord Aldrich Vane himself, because Raina's mother had discovered something, was a financial architecture buried inside the Eastern grain route taxation system. A quiet, decades-long theft of resources from borderland packs that had been funneled directly into pureblood elder coffers while common wolves starved through 3 consecutive hard winters. She had the documents. She had the evidence. She told the wrong person first. The tribunal lasted 4 hours. The exile order took 6 minutes to sign. Raina's mother was stripped of rank, bloodline recognition, and packed standing before the sun went down. She died in exile 2 years later, cold, unacknowledged, carrying evidence that would have changed everything, evidence that Aldrich Vane had already destroyed. Or so he believed. Raina had memorized every page, every single page. At 14 years old, at barefoot in an exile settlement with nothing but her mother's name and a head full of numbers that could dismantle a council, Raina Blackwood made a decision. She would not fight the board they had built. She would learn it, master it, move every piece on it with more precision than anyone who had ever played before her. And then she would burn it down from the inside. That is not villainy. That is a she-wolf who was handed a war she didn't start and refused to lose it. But here is where it gets complicated. Here is where Raina, brilliant, patient, devastatingly strategic Raina, made the one mistake that all survivors eventually make. She stopped being able to tell the difference between the people she was using and the people she actually loved. Elena was supposed to be a piece. That was the original architecture of the plan. Elena's Lunaseer bloodline, once Raina had confirmed it through years of careful, quiet observation, was the most valuable political asset on the continent. An oracle wolf, properly positioned beside the Alpha King, would have more influence over crown decisions than any council, any elder, any military general alive. And if that oracle wolf's bond with the king could be controlled, monitored, guided, managed, then whoever held that wolf's trust held the throne by a thread so fine it was invisible. Raina had held Elena's trust for 6 years. The plan was elegant. The plan was airtight. The plan had one problem. Raina had not calculated the possibility that she would come to genuinely love Elena, not as an asset, not as a piece, as a person, and as the closest thing to a sister she had allowed herself since her mother died in that exile settlement with evidence in her chest and cold in her bones. She had not calculated for that. And by the time she understood it was happening, by the time she recognized the warmth in her chest when Elena laughed, the particular fury she felt when anyone dismissed Elena's gift as witchcraft, the night she sat outside Elena's door for 2 hours because Elena was having a vision that was making her cry, and Raina couldn't decide whether to knock or maintain the architecture of distance her plan required. It was too late to restructure, so she did what survivors do. She kept moving forward and refused to look directly at the cost. The deal with Aldrich Vane came in year 8. He approached her, and not the other way around. And I want to be precise about that because it matters. Raina had been careful, in all her years of political maneuvering, to never initiate contact with the pureblood elders directly. She understood instinctively that the moment she approached them, she became a supplicant. And Raina Blackwood had not survived exile, grief, and a decade of invisible warfare to become anyone's supplicant. Aldrich found her at a territorial summit in the Greymoor settlements. He sat beside her at dinner uninvited, poured her wine she didn't touch, and said,
"You want the Eastern throne. I want the Oracle. We are both, at this particular moment in history, in a position to give each other exactly what we need. The only question, Raina, is whether you are still sentimental enough to let a borderland girl stand between you and everything your mother died trying to protect."
Raina looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the wine, held it, set it back down untouched, and said, "Tell me the terms." She told me later, years later, in the kind of honest conversation that only happens after everything has already burned, and the only thing left is the truth. That she had said those 3 words as a stall, a tactical delay. She needed to know what he knew, what he wanted, and how far his reach extended before she could calculate a countermove. But the countermove took longer than she expected, because Aldrich Vane was not the predictable creature she had assumed. His terms were not imprisonment, not a forced bond ritual performed in secret. The terms were surgical, institutional, and deeply researched, which told Reyna immediately that he had people inside her network, and he wanted Elena's Lunaseer gift bound to the pureblood bloodline through an ancient ceremony called the Moon Seal Rite, a ritual so old it predated written wolf law, a ritual that didn't require Elena's cooperation, only her presence, only her blood, and only a blood moon. The next blood moon was 14 months away. Reyna had 14 months to either deliver Elena or find a way to dismantle Aldrich Vane entirely before he realized she was trying to. She chose dismantling. Of course she did, but here is the twist, the one that undid everything. 3 weeks into her counter-operation, 3 weeks of careful intelligence gathering, of quietly rebuilding the evidence architecture her mother had died for, Reyna's most trusted intelligence contact inside Shadowmere Palace sent her a single coded message. No preamble, no context. Just a name, Elena's father, and beneath it, a bloodline notation that Reyna read 4 times before she allowed herself to understand what it meant. Elena Voss was not a borderland wolf. She was not a common-born, not unranked, not the untitled girl Reyna had spent 6 years believing she was protecting and positioning in equal measure. Elena was the last direct heir of the Lunaseer Coven's founding bloodline, which meant, under the Moonborn Charter, under laws so ancient, Aldrich Vane had spent 30 years ensuring nobody remembered them. Elena didn't need Reyna's protection. Elena didn't need the Eastern Throne Gambit. Elena didn't need any of it. Elena already outranked every pureblood elder on the continent, including Aldrich Vane, including, technically, the Alpha King himself. Reyna sat with that information for a very long time, in the dark, alone. And for the first time in 20 years, the most strategically dangerous she-wolf alive had absolutely no idea what her next move was, because the piece she had been playing across the board for a decade had just turned out to be the board itself. She had spent a decade moving pieces. She had spent a decade believing she understood the game. And in one coded message, in the dark, alone, the board dissolved beneath her hands. The war didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like a slow leak. That's what nobody tells you about the wars that matter. The ones that reshape continents and rewrite bloodlines and leave scars on the land itself. They don't announce themselves. They don't give you the courtesy of a clear beginning. And they seep in through the cracks of things you thought were holding, through old debts and quiet resentments and the particular patience of men like Aldrich Vane, who have been waiting decades for the right moment to collect. Elena had seen it coming for 10 years. And it still arrived like a surprise. Because visions show you the what, they never show you the wait. She had seen the war in fragments, clean, almost cinematic fragments, the way the moon goddess tends to deliver revelation to her Lunaseers. Detached, observable, like watching something terrible happen behind thick glass. The reality was nothing like the glass. The reality was the smell, ash and blood and wet earth and something underneath both that you never fully name but never fully forget. And the reality was the sound, not the dramatic clash of her visions, but the terrible human smallness of it. Wolves crying for people, not for victory, not for territory, for people. She moved through the outer territories in the third week of open conflict, keeping to the tree lines, using her visions to navigate around the worst of it. A Luna seer moving through a war she had foreseen like a ghost, haunting her own prophecy. And then the vision hit her on the Ashbourne Ridge. Not a fragment this time. The full thing. All at once. Every detail she had seen 3 weeks before the blood moon. The ambush, the ridge, the specific quality of the dawn light, the smell of pine and iron and old power. She was already running before she fully understood why. She found him at first light. Caspian Drave, Alpha King of Shadowmere, the most powerful wolf alive, face down in the mud. I need you to sit with that image for a moment, because I think, somewhere between the blood moon ceremony and the battlefield, it's easy to forget that underneath the crown, underneath the decade of silent governance and strategic brilliance and the mythology that had built up around his name, he was just a wolf who had been fighting alone for 10 years, and it had cost him everything it had to give. His wounds were bad. The ambush had been precise, too precise for standard military intelligence. Someone had known his route. Someone inside his own war council had given Aldrich Vane the information needed to put Shadowmere's king face down in the mud on the Ashbourne Ridge at dawn, with no beta, no guard, when a wolf spirit too exhausted to finish the shift that might have saved him. Elena dropped to her knees beside him. His eyes found her immediately, like his wolf had known she was coming before she arrived. And here is where I need to ask you something, because I think you've been watching this with a particular assumption lodged quietly in the back of your mind. You've been assuming Elena came back for him, that somewhere in the 7 years of exile and vision and running, she had been moving, consciously or not, back toward Caspian. That love was the gravitational pull underneath everything, that the moon goddess's design was always drawing her home. What if it wasn't? What if Elena came to that ridge not because she loved him, but because she still believed she was the variable, the catalyst? What if she ran toward the ambush she'd foreseen because she still carried that original vision, herself at the center, him not surviving, and she was trying one more time to rewrite it? What if she came not to confess, but to save him the way you save something you feel responsible for breaking? Because that changes everything about what happened next. She pulled him upright. He was heavier than she expected. Or she was smaller than she remembered being, after years of exile, and carrying visions that never lightened. She pressed her hands against the wound in his side, and felt the bond scar on her sternum respond. A deep, resonant ache, like a bell being struck after years of silence. He looked at her the way you look at something you have rehearsed letting go of. "You came?" he said, not accusatory, not relieved, just acknowledging, the way you acknowledge a fact that is too large for either celebration or grief. "Don't," she said. "I'm not doing anything." "You're about to." Elena, just her name, that was all. And it undid 10 years and 3 syllables. She told him about the visions, all of them. Not the managed version she had rehearsed in her head across a decade of exile. The clean, logical explanation that justified her rejection and reframed her running as sacrifice. The real version. The ugly, frightened 23-year-old version of a girl who had seen the man she was already falling for, standing at the center of a burning world, and decided that the only way to protect him was to remove herself from the equation. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then, you saw the crown at your feet," she stilled. "In the vision, you saw my crown at your feet, and you thought it meant I was dead. It meant—" "Elena!" His jaw tightened. Not in anger. In the particular tension of a man about to say something true, that he has been holding for a decade. I put the crown down. In the 5th year, I put it on the floor of my war room, and I left it there for 3 days because I needed to know if I still wanted to be king without my father's expectations in the room. The crown at your feet wasn't a death. It was a choice. I chose the crown back, but I chose it differently. She stared at him. The vision hadn't shown her his death. It showed her his transformation. And she had spent 10 years running from the wrong thing. And the bond ruptured back open between them like a dam that had been holding the weight of an ocean. Both of them hit the mud from the force of it. And on every ridge, in every tree line, in every exile settlement from Ashbourne to the Tidewolf Coast, every wolf within 100 miles lifted their head at exactly the same moment. Ears forward, eyes wide. Something ancient and enormous moving through the air like a second moon rising. The moon goddess, apparently, had been patient enough. Here is something they never teach you about old power. It doesn't go quietly. It doesn't recognize defeat. It doesn't read the room. It doesn't look at the evidence mounting against it and make a graceful exit. Old power, the kind that has been sitting in the same chair for 3 centuries, at the kind that has rewritten laws around itself so many times, it has forgotten which laws it invented and which ones it actually believes. Old power gets loud when it's cornered. And Aldrich Vane had never been more cornered in his life. The rebonding hit his intelligence network like a shock wave. His people felt it before they reported it. That silver pulse moving through the air on the Ashbourne Ridge, touching every wolf within 100 miles. By the time his inner council assembled in the Shadowmere War Annex, 3 of his most reliable pack allies had already sent messengers requesting renegotiation of their loyalty terms. 3 centuries of political architecture, cracking in a single dawn. He did what cornered men with 3 centuries of weapons always do. He used all of them at once. Within 72 hours, and the defections began. 3 allied packs pulled their military support from the crown in formal, carefully worded declarations that managed to say treason without using the word. Pureblood elder family heads who had been publicly neutral for a decade suddenly had opinions. Ancient legal challenges, dormant for 50 years, kept like loaded weapons in archive drawers, were filed against Caspian's reforms simultaneously from 6 different territories, in a coordinated sequence so precise it could only have been prepared years in advance. And then someone tried to kill Elena, not clumsily, not desperately, professionally. The wolf they sent was ex-royal military, decorated, patient. He had been inside the Ashbourne relief camp for 11 days before he made his move. 11 days of building trust, as of learning the rhythms of the camp, of positioning himself with the kind of quiet competence that only someone who has done this before can manage. He almost succeeded. It was Reyna who stopped him, not Caspian's guards, not Orion, not the elaborate protective perimeter Caspian had constructed around Elena since the rebonding. Reyna, who had been in that camp for 9 of those 11 days, who nobody had told to be there, who had simply arrived. Because she had been tracking Aldrich Vane's intelligence movements for 8 years, and she recognized the pattern 3 days before anyone else did. She didn't explain herself afterward. She just looked at Elena across the space where the assassin was no longer standing and said, "Before you say anything, I know what I did. I know what the plan was. I know what I used you for, and I know there is no version of an apology that covers it. I'm not here to apologize. I'm here because Aldrich Vane just tried to have you killed, and that means he's afraid of you. And anything that man is afraid of." She paused, something moving briefly across her face that she didn't bother to hide. "I protect, whether I deserve to or not." Elena looked at her for a long time, then, "You memorized your mother's evidence, every page. You've had it in your head for 20 years. Raina went very still. You're going to need to write it down, Elena said quietly. All of it, because where I'm going to need every word. Now, I want you to stop for a moment, because I think you've been watching Raina the way the histories watch her. As the she-wolf who almost destroyed Elena, the one who moved her like a piece, the cautionary figure in the margins of a love story. But what if Raina was never the antagonist? What if she was always the missing piece? The wolf who had been carrying the evidence that could dismantle the Pureblood Council for 20 years, waiting, without knowing it, for the one person with the authority to use it. What if the moon goddess put Raina in Elena's life not as a threat, but as a delivery mechanism? Elena walked into the night crown chamber 3 days later, alone. Caspian had argued against it with everything he had, and I mean everything. He had used logic, authority, desperation, and finally, raw, unguarded fear in a way that a man like him exposes perhaps twice in a lifetime. He had stood in front of her with his hand on the door and his crown nowhere in sight, and said words that cost him something enormous to say out loud. She had put her hand on his face, looked at him for a long, complete moment, and walked past him anyway, because her vision had shown her this room. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't running from what the vision showed her. She was walking toward it. The night crown chamber was beneath Shadowmere's oldest foundation, carved from black moonstone before the palace existed, before the Drave bloodline existed, before written wolf law drew its first territorial line. The air inside was different. Older? The kind of air that remembers things the surface world has forgotten. Aldrich Vane was already there, older up close than his portrait suggested, harder, at the particular hardness of a man who made a terrible decision so long ago that he has spent every year since building justifications, tall enough to live inside. He looked at her the way men look at things they underestimated. You came alone, he said. I came as myself, Elena replied. That's never been the same thing as alone. She reached inside her coat and placed Raina's evidence, 20 years of memorized financial corruption, transcribed in 3 days of Raina's precise, furious handwriting, on the stone between them. Then she reached into her other pocket and placed something else beside it. The document Bella Morn had burned. Except it wasn't burned. Bella had burned a copy, and the original had been in Elena's possession since the morning of Bella's death, pressed into her hand in the palace garden with trembling fingers, and the quiet, complete smile of a woman finishing something she had started a century ago. Aldrich Vane looked at the document, and for the first time in 3 centuries of old power, he had nothing to say. Elena leaned forward. Under the Moonborn Charter, which you have spent 30 years ensuring nobody remembered, my bloodline supersedes your council's authority in every territory, every tribunal, and every ceremonial function, including this one. You don't have the jurisdiction to perform the Night Crown ritual. You never did. And every action your council has taken against the crown, against borderland wolves, and against my bloodline for the past 3 decades is not just corrupt. She picked up the document, held it. It's void. The shadow moved at the chamber entrance. Aldrich Vane moved fast, faster than a man his age should have been capable of. And Elena was already turning when the cold hit her. But it wasn't cold. It was Raina, stepping from the shadow with the particular finality of a she-wolf who has been waiting 20 years for this exact moment and is not going to miss it. It was over in seconds. And the Pureblood Elder Council, 3 centuries of architecture, of corruption, of quietly stolen grain and manufactured exile, and wolves left to die in cold settlements with evidence in their chests, ended, not with a war, with a document, and a she-wolf who never forgot a single page. The war ends quietly, in the way all the important things do, no fanfare, no declaration, Just 12 pack leaders standing in a circle under an open sky. Wolves who have not shared the same ground in living memory. Watching Elena dissolve 3 centuries of corruption with a document and a bloodline, and the particular stillness of a woman who has finally stopped running from herself. Reina is offered the Eastern throne. She refuses it. What she takes instead is so much more powerful that Aldrich Vane, had he been there to witness it, would have understood finally that he never once knew who he was dealing with. Caspian doesn't propose in the Great Hall. Of course he doesn't. He does it in the garden, at dawn, without his crown, on one knee, not in possession, but in gratitude, for a woman who rejected him, broke him, exiled herself, weren't nearly let him die, and still almost managed to become exactly who the moon goddess always knew she was. Elena looks at the broken crown pendant, fused back together with gold. She puts it on. And here is what I want you to ask yourself tonight. If the moon goddess showed you the most important thing in your life and it terrified you completely, would you run? Or would you finally trust the vision? Because Elena's story doesn't end here. Neither does Reina's. Neither does the world they built from the bones of everything that tried to destroy them. That part is just beginning.